This is the St. Charles History Chronicle, episode 2402. Chicago urban historian Shermann Dilla Thomas joins Eric and Steve at the microphones to talk about history ties between Chicago and St. Charles, and lifelong St. Charles resident John Maxon, a Civil War soldier who was in the 29th U.S. Colored Troop Infantry Regiment and was gravely injured at the Battle of the Crater. Brought to you by the St. Charles History Museum in St. Charles, Illinois.
Hi, everybody. This is Steve Gibson. I'm the past president now of the St. Charles History Museum, and you're listening to St. Charles History Chronicle. I'm here again with my co-host, our collections manager and exhibits manager, Eric Krupa. How you doing, Eric?
Doing very well, Steve. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. And we are also joined today on the phone. Yeah, it's Dilla Thomas, who's a Chicago historian. Got a great following out on social media. I've had a chance to watch some of his short YouTube videos and stuff. I'm very jealous of how well you do that, Dilla. And
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, no, thank you. You know, I love any museum in the state, and so I'm always happy to support like-minded folks, right, who believe in preserving and disseminating history. So thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And like you say, everything dope comes from Chicago, so we're going to be talking about a story that kind of ties our town, St. Charles, along with Chicago. I guess you could consider our town kind of like a weird cousin of Chicago. We've been around for almost as long, a few decades. We've shared a lot of same interests, but we lacked a railroad, so basically we were left out in the dust there, while Elgin and Aurora kind of became the big two cities. But early on, we were actually kind of up there, kind of one of the suburbs that people were intrigued about.
Our beginnings start with a couple of guys, Ira Menard and Dean Fearson, who are actually land developers down in Chicago. And what they're doing is flipping property. They're buying property and selling it. And they hook up with a guy by the name of Evan Shelby, who has just platted the first homestead out here in St. Charles. And he's in buying supplies, and he tells them about this wonderful land he's found along the Fox River. They come back out with them, buy the other side of the river, and essentially cut a deal with Evan for some acreage along the river, as long as they'll put a dam and a bridge in. So it's really a pretty tight tie-in to the time when we're talking about here is after the Treaty of Chicago, 1833, 1834. And I think at the time, the best thing that Chicago had going for it was Lake Michigan. The best thing we had going for us out here was a route that went straight from Chicago all the way out to the Mississippi and crossed the Fox River here in an area that horses and wagons didn't have to go on a bridge. So.
Yeah. You know, we're our history, like you all's, is pretty rooted in water, right? Before we got those trains, it was exactly what you're talking about, your ability to get to Lake Michigan and cut the Chicago River to the Illinois River to get to the Mississippi. That they kind of brought on a lot of trade, and it was a good focal point, particularly right before the War of 1812. So, you know, we got that same water history going for us as well.
Yeah, and transportation is kind of the key all the way along. I know we had down in Chicago, you had a stagecoach route that ran from Chicago all over northern Illinois, and I tell people it's literally the same stagecoach that you see in the old, westerns. It's run by Frink and Walker, I think was the name.
I think it was Walker. I
remember
Frink
Walker. Yeah. Frink was kind of a very cool businessman, but he actually basically monopolized the entire stagecoach business out here. Then he monopolized the entire canal business out here, like Lockport and places like that. And the whole thing, he puts the whole thing together and gets it all done about 1853 or something, and then the railroad comes along and basically wipes out everything he's set up. So transportation is the key over and over. And one of the things I hope to do one of these days, I haven't been down there, and Eric was down there telling me about it, is see that Pioneer locomotive down at the Chicago Historical Society.
Oh yeah,
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, go check it out. I take kids by there all the time. When I was a kid, they used to let you climb all through it and on it. So it's a little more roped on, which I suppose is good. So that way we have it for a couple more years.
Yeah.
But it's really, really cool.
We're going to be speaking more about a certain person today, a gentleman by the name of John Maxon, who was actually formerly enslaved. He escaped or was freed, ended up in Chicago right before the Civil War in 1861, ended up enlisting with the 29th Regiment here in Illinois, which was the only all-black regiment out of our state. And then after the war, he actually moved over to St. Charles and lived out the rest of his life working in one of the actual better jobs in the local area in a paper mill. But his story starts basically in 1835, and we don't really know too much about that. That's something we need to work on a little bit more, finding the history and roots behind enslaved people, especially down in Virginia and Maryland. It's something that... as we'll say, St. Charles has basically been a place that lacked diversity for quite a while. Between the years of 1833 and basically the 1870s, 80s, we only had about 20 people of African descent. But our town at the early part of our place was actually a stop on the Underground Railroad, coming out from Kansas over Missouri, and then across the river to Quincy, and then over to here, and then off to New York.
There was in Illinois, particularly in our early stages, right? I won't say that we were anti-racist, because that would be a stretch. But folks who found themselves on the northern end of Illinois were very much anti-slavery. And I think it has a little to do with the fact that they understood it as an economic thing, right? It'd be very hard to compete with the South economically if they got free labor and you don't, right? So just along with those lines, folks in Illinois were really, really tolerant, and particularly up you guys' way. There's so many stories in the Cairo newspaper archives how slave catchers would come from Kentucky and other places. And once somebody got, north is Kankakee, they would just stop trying because they know they wouldn't get the assistance from the local sheriff or peacekeeper, if you will. They knew businessmen certainly weren't going to help them to, re-catch anybody. And so I'm not shocked to hear that you guys had, as early as the 1840s up in that region.
We actually had some really close ties to the Underground Railroad. It comes up every time we do a tour here. Being along a river, we've got a lot of tunnels that go from homes down to the river, and everybody thinks every one of those is a stop on the Underground Railroad. It takes a little discussion to tell you that essentially those were the way that people got items and goods into businesses in those days, and garbage out of the businesses. But the Underground Railroad was two things I always tell people. It wasn't underground and it wasn't a railroad. They called people conductors, that was the thing. But I think the other thing that comes up about the Underground Railroad, and I like to dissuade people of this, is it was unbelievably severe, the punishment you got because of the Fugitive Slave Act and because of the Dred Scott decision. The penalty throughout the United States was enough to cripple your finances of almost anybody and to put you in jail. And back in those days, you weren't the only one that had to pay your bills. Your family paid your bills. So if you got a fine for doing this, your entire family could be in the poorhouse for a generation taking care of this. So it was a serious thing, which means a lot of people wouldn't brag about the fact that they were doing it, even though they knew they were doing it and they had to do it. And up here, it was kind of an open secret. Like you said, once you get this far north, it was a little bit safer to do it. But man, this town was an abolitionist town, and I think as well as we do that abolitionism is not the same thing as anti-slavery. But we were an abolitionist town. That, in other words, we didn't want slavery to be the rule of law up here, or in new states that came along. And then on the other side, we were a very religious town, a town of people that everything that you talked about in this town was based on Protestant, basically, and Catholic religions. And it was, I think those things really played into what people felt was the right thing to do for us up here. So,
did you guys have a dry history, right? Were you dry for any particular length of time?
Yeah, we were actually in right around 1900 when they passed what they call it the local option law in Illinois, and you could actually petition if you were such a city, basically, and we were by that time. You could petition to be dry, and we actually were very proud of that. We were dry, I think, from 1900 until the passing of the 18th Amendment.
Yeah,
right?
The Women's Christian Temperance Union was very strong in this town. They went even well past, well after the Prohibition had been lifted and all that stuff, so... They kept going until the late 30s, I believe.
Now, saying that on the other side, Dilla, if I go before that, we were kind of the opposite of that. A lot of have you seen the Sanborn fire maps?
Yes.
Okay, so our Sanborn fire maps look like Rush Street in Chicago. It's like a block with 6 bars, and what isn't a bar is a cigar factory. This was a working man's town, and definitely, that's the kind of thing, though. In those days, that was it kind of went in waves, didn't it, back and forth from one way to the other.
Yeah. And Mr. Maxon here, he ended up in one of those factories, the Brownell Miller paper factory, where he actually cut and reamed the paper there himself. Apparently, they like to brag it was the best paper in basically all of the town, but that was before there were many paper mills. So actually, what was special about this place is there was 2 basic spots where African Americans and Black Americans could find employment around town. That would be basically working as a housekeeper. There was also, we actually had a couple Pullman porters from town as well that went off to do that. And then we also, basically, you worked in the factories there. And there was one factory where the owner was much more racist and hardcore and not a good guy. And luckily, Mr. Maxon chose the factory, the paper factory, that actually gave every employee, no matter what color, no matter anything, a whole turkey for dinner if they were married. And a whole pound and a half of clams, they said, with a box of crackers.
Christmas
if you were,
time? Yeah.
Christmas time is their bonus for a sack of paper. And Maxon also was fortunate and unfortunate in that he had a Civil War pension that actually contributed to his monetary fund as well. And the reason he got that pension is because at the Battle of the Crater, he actually got shot through the neck and survived. This story actually plays out a lot like Glory. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of similarities between this and that. So Maxon signed up actually in Chicago at the onset of the war when African Americans and Black people could enlist after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. He actually was signed up in a group by this gentleman by the name of John Bross. Bross was actually the brother of the editor of the Chicago Tribune at the time. So he was once a Douglas Democrat, became a hardcore Lincoln Republican, and then he ended up basically taking on this commission to raise a Black regiment in Illinois. So when Maxon signed up, they basically were left to do work behind the lines, building defenses, and basically digging out stuff, guarding wagons and wagon trains. But as the more colored regiments is what they were called, as they were pushed out into battle, they actually got all these commendations. People saw how good and hard they were willing to fight, and they gave them more battlefield commissions, when the most important one, or one of the ones that really proved the bravery and strength of everyone, was the Siege of Petersburg, and specifically the Battle of the Crater. And the Battle of the Crater was basically going to be the first time a Black regiment fully led a divisional regimental charge. However, the commander at the time, at the day before, he said he basically overrode his generals, and they ended up sending this white regiment in instead. And the white regiment was not trained the same way, and they actually ended up stuck in the crater. They ended up stuck. They were getting slaughtered like fish in a barrel, pretty much.
Well, let's talk about the crater a little
Thank
bit.
you.
The idea was
I'm going off and just reading, so I apologize.
Yeah, the idea was that they were going to basically use explosives to blow up an entire Confederate, was it a brigade? It was a large amount of people. Ended up, they had all sorts of trouble with it. They had to dig under this hill. They end up setting the charges off at 4:44 in the morning on July 30th, 1864. They create a crater that's 130 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 30 feet deep. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be that big of a hole. And essentially, now they kind of found themselves in a situation where instead of being able to charge straight forward against these Confederate troops, they have to march around this huge hole in the ground to get to it. But a lot of guys, especially these white troops that are first sent in to do it, they stick with the original order, which is to march straight into that crater, and that's what they do. And eventually the Confederate forces regroup after this surprise of this explosion and come back and fight against these white troops.
Well, the Union soldiers, they get bogged down trying to help the dying Confederates in there, and they're absolutely shocked and they're in awe, and they literally stop fighting for a bit, and that gives the Confederates time to regroup.
Yeah.
They come pushing forward.
And then they basically, everything goes to hell, and they all start trying to retreat either orderly or some other way. And like you say, a lot of the Union troops end up getting caught inside the crater, which literally becomes like shooting fish in a barrel, and it becomes hand-to-hand contact. I mean, the image in my head of what's going on at this moment is just incredible. But then tell them what happens with John Maxon and the color bearer.
Yeah, so after this, they finally go, and they're sending in the 29th Colored Infantry, is what they were called, regiment. They basically send them forward, and as John's charging, he's the color bearer, so he's holding the regimental colors, the flag of the Union, and the 29th Infantry, their flag. As he's marching forward, a mini ball basically takes him right through the neck and puts him down. But while that's happening, another person rushes forward to grab the flag, basically saves it from falling. He gets immediately killed. Another guy does the same thing. He gets killed. Then the next guy, I think John Barros says something like, for the next person that saves the colors, you'll get a promotion. Another gentleman goes. He gets blown away, too. I think his thumb gets amputated. And then finally Barros or somebody grabs the colors himself, and as he jumps up the parapet, he gets shot, and he says, "Oh, God," and the colors fall basically into the crater.
And they never recovered the colors.
Yeah.
Was a Chicago lawyer who's technically the first casualty of the war, because he saw like a bar that was flying the Confederate colors, and he climbed up there and snatched it down.
Oh no, I never heard this.
Yeah, and when he went up there and snatched it down, and the same thing, he snatched it down to replace it with an American flag. It ended up being shot in his neck and losing his life. He's a lot of historians consider him the first casualty of the Civil War, which is really unique to hear.
Oh, yeah.
As we think about the amount of lives that were lost just to make sure that we preserve the colors, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, that's the thing about the color bearer is actually that was given as a position of honor for people. But I lived in Tennessee for a while, and one of the things that's down there is the Battle of Franklin, and I had never realized until I looked from where the Battle of Franklin took place that how important the flags were for the commanders who were actually running the battle, because that was how they told where their troops were, how far they advanced, what condition they were in, everything else. Literally, it was like having a dots on a TV screen to be able to see your colors still held. So that's why it was so important tactically.
And that's why they were big targets too.
Yeah, well, and of course that was the first thing you wanted to do, because as soon as you took that out, the general back on top of the hill had no idea what the condition of the war was. So
I've heard the stories of the 29th. My asthma got me kicked out, but most of my, very, very valiantly served. My dad was in Vietnam. His dad went to World War II. His dad fought in World War I. And we had ancestors who signed up for the Civil War. And one of the things they said about the 29th is that they would march singing the song of John Brown's body.
Yep, that is correct. There, we have that in the thing. There is they marched into Petersburg finally after the battle. They victoriously march in here, and they actually only spend 2 hours in Petersburg, which was under siege for like 2.5 years or something crazy. And like you said, they're singing John Brown's body to the tune of Battle Hymn of the Republic, I'm pretty sure. But that was, it's a really powerful kind of scene and image if you could just imagine it. I mean, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There was even stated that the 29th was down in Galveston, Texas, when those poor souls were told that the Civil War was over and that they were free, which we today celebrate as Juneteenth. So that's an amazing history.
Absolutely. And Maxon was actually, after he was wounded, he spent 5 months in a hospital in Alexandria, and I actually got to reach out to the archivists at the city over there, and they were able to pull out the list, and he's listed as John Maxim, or what was it, Maxwell, but he's on there and he's listed, and he actually joins up before they get shipped to Texas, and the trip to Texas is actually one hellish thing where it's like raw food that they're eating, just spoiled meat. 3 people die on the voyage. And it's all because the waves, and there was a storm that they ended up in Galveston on June 18th, which is just one day before Juneteenth. And they're there basically docked at the dock while they're putting up the brochures, the pamphlets, the general orders around Galveston. I mean, it's an incredible scene to really think. And Maxon is right there. He's listed as being on there. And he was basically bearing witness to something that, you know, so many years down the line has become such, well, even back then, it's just such an integral part of history.
That is, it's really something. I wonder if he signed up at Camp Douglas, right? You know,
Oh, yeah.
Camp Douglas was where a good majority of African Americans who listed would have enlisted at the front end following the emancipation. But then, you know, very soon after that, it becomes the very famous Confederate prisoner of war. I'm wondering if he enlisted.
That I actually don't. I know that I think he enlisted actually. They were out of one of the ones. Was it Quincy? I know he signed up in Chicago, but they all actually had to be mustered out to like Quincy or something to sign up and finally get their papers, I believe. But Camp Douglas is interesting because we actually have one of our volunteers at the museum who's been doing some of the archaeology over there a few years ago. And she actually found some, you know, a store of where ammunition was or something like that. So,
No kidding.
yeah.
That place was so bad that even the Northerners would go over there and throw food over the gates to the.
It's funny how the POW situation in the Civil War started out so completely different from how it ended up. You know, when it first started out, they basically would take you a prisoner, make you sign a statement saying that you wouldn't fight anymore, and parole you. Okay, but, you know, or they traded you for their troops, or a million other kind of, let's call them, gentlemanly way to handle with this stuff. But as it gets on later on, I think it's the sheer numbers. Nobody in the world thought. I mean, you know, you think about Andersonville or Camp Douglas, like you're saying, and just realize, I can't believe anybody actually wanted those places to exist like that. But once it starts, there's absolutely nothing to do. You can't stop the trains arriving. It's amazing.
Yep.
You know, my great grandfather actually served in the Iowa 6th Infantry, fought at the Battle of Shiloh, and my dad was in World War II. He was in Bataan at the time, out of Maywood. You know, these are the things that kind of give us that idea. When you think of history, you think of history as being like something ancient, like, you know, Mesopotamia or something. This local history and this like military history really joins the generations in a really like short circuits them almost, because it's a shared experience of being in battle. You know, whether you're in battle in the Civil War or the War of 1812 or in Vietnam or even Afghanistan or anything else, it's a shared experience that you know, every generation has some touch base with that. Isn't that true?
Yeah, very, very much so. And a lot of times there are still, you know, those who fought in the war preceding the one you're off on your way to, who come to the events, who come see you off, and then when you come home, you know, they join VFWs, right? And you want to out people who've had that shared experience. And most of the time, the senior people there, right, like that, when we were fighting in World War I, there were still Civil War veterans and the Spanish American War veterans still around. Tell those guys stories and say, you know, there's a number of people who fought, you know, World War I and World War II, right? I'm sure that they pass those stories down as well. And like you said, we're not that far removed, right? We're a couple grandpas removed.
Yeah.
All these things, right? And that's kind of the way that I explain history and explain history to my kids and people that I teach the history to. Like, if you can think and remember stories of your grandfather, then just imagine that your grandfather can remember his grandfather.
Yeah.
And that's about the length of time that in a lot of instances, these stories take place. You guys have me absolutely enamored with John, though, because to have experienced all that, lived through all of that, then be here in Illinois where we had, you know, Douglas, who writes the Nebraska-Kansas Act, which changes the complexity of the slavery question prior to, right? And how many Douglas Democrats were around prior to that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that he lived a pretty awesome life.
Oh, he absolutely did. I mean, the wound did, it ended his life at some point. I think it got infected or abscessed.
It literally never healed.
And
22 years later.
People would always say, like, you know, if a kid went up and asked him, he would show him or whatever in the papers, and they were like, oh, it was ghastly or whatever they would say in the paper there. Speaking of the Douglas Democrat thing, he actually once got booed out of our town. Over in Wayne Station, which is just a little bit north of us there, he did a whistle stop after one of the debates with Lincoln, I believe. Not the one in Freeport. It might be Freeport, yeah. So after one of the debates, he shows up there, and this crowd basically of 3 people shows up to support him. And once word gets out that Douglas is giving a speech, all these abolitionists led by John Franklin Farnsworth allegedly show up with, you know, just scouting the premises with like socks full of weighted stuff. And then Douglas decides to attack an old man in the audience, like verbally, who was actually allegedly just giving him a fair question kind of thing. And the town just didn't have it. They booed him out, and they basically, from Douglas's side, they say it was a very disappointing experience or something like that.
Well, I'll tell you, Dilla, a couple other things we've got tied, kind of close ties Civil War-wise. You know, this is the area where Mary Todd Lincoln ended up being basically sent to an asylum out here in Batavia. But there's some linkage to St. Charles because at the time she was using mediums to try to reach both Abraham and her other son, not Robert. Tad. Yeah. And having some luck at it, I guess, enough that she would come back regularly for that. And then we've also got a tie-in because John Farnsworth, who was one of our leading citizens here, was actually the person that put Abe's name into nomination at the convention to be president, and was pretty good friends with Abe. And in the end, the 8th Illinois Cavalry ended up being his honor guard for the train that took his body back to Springfield. So
yeah.
That's I knew that poor Robert sent his mother away.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a whole story there. Yeah.
Where that away was. You know, a lot of people. Well, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but it's new to folks that this is where they chose to come. Yeah. You know, the North Illinois area following the assassination of his father. Right? They ended up in what was then the town of Hyde Park.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where he shared an apartment with his mother. To like, you know, a lot of guys get too old to be at home with moms. They moves out, finds an apartment.
Well, she was a shopaholic. That literally is why he got mad. Was she was literally spending his money and buying stuff like thousands of pairs of gloves and things like that. But yeah, it's an interesting story. And you know, what do you do when you're somebody like Mary Lincoln? When you read her history, there's nobody could be sadder than what that woman went through and the ups and downs in her life. So. Well, we know you had a time limit for us, and we don't want to keep you any longer than you have time for us, but really it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, it's been absolutely a pleasure, Dilla. Thank you for doing this.
It gives me more ammo because contemporarily, right, we talk about the St. Charles Boys Home and some of the, I don't want to use legendary, infamous souls spend time there. And like you all, I'm very much into the positive side of things, right?
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
Annals of anything, never been the infamous, but the infamous aren't why we're still around. It's the peacemakers like John and
absolutely.
Others who put the best foot forward on why we're still around as a society and as towns and cities. So thank you for this. This was very awesome.
Oh, absolutely, Dilla. We really appreciate it. And, I mean, if there's any other Chicago things, I'll send them your way because there's pretty much everything here is a tie there. So I won't bother you with all that.
Yeah, love to do it again sometime, too, if we come up with something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we'll, I think we're actually trying to go on one of those Chicago mahogany tours there down in Bronzeville. So me and my fiance one of these weekends. So we'll catch you down there.
We'll take you by Camp Douglas.
I'm wearing my Everything Dope Comes from Chicago t-shirt today, so.
I didn't know you had that on under the hoodie there. Oh, man.
Well, now you got one, brother.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey, thank you so much, Dilla, for coming on.
We'll talk to you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Yeah. So lately, Steve and I have actually been doing some research into the Black history of St. Charles, which obviously has been something that's been neglected because of the lack of diversity in the area, frankly.
Lack of diversity and literally
records.
lack of records. Yeah.
Literally, like, hardly anything to go on. I'm going
Yeah.
on slivers of information here. And it's all because basically the 1885 directory decided to list who was black and who was white. And these families, I mean, they all ended up, like, you know, marrying into each other's family, and it became a very close-knit community in town here. They actually, a couple churches were raised, one in 1870 and then another one in 1885. But the gentleman who raised that church actually ended up being not such a good person. He moved down to Aurora, where he was accused of striking his kids and wife, I believe, and he was chased out of town.
Oh, well.
But more positive stuff.
Well, I think that the thing is with our history, especially when you're talking about our history of diversity, because we're a farming town,
Yes.
and because at the time that this all comes together, 1830s up till 1860, I don't think it's that unusual if this ends up being an all white, all Swedish, or all Norwegian
No,
town.
not at all. I mean, there wasn't that migration, you know, as we say, until much later, until industry, and obviously until the Civil War.
Exactly. The Civil War makes a big difference, and for us, because we have enslaved people that show up during the war via the Underground Railroad.
And people bringing them back, like General Farnsworth and people such as S.S. Jones's George Bundy brought back a couple gentlemen from down south, and they lived and ran basically the Tremont block, one of them did.
That's true. That's true. And so we get a little bit of an influx there. We get time kind of stands still for us if we get into
general
in the 1880s and industrial area.
Oh, yeah.
Because we don't have the railroad, we don't go through there's a period right around 1900 where things get really dead in this town. And in fact, I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but we have a kind of a depression in this town where it doesn't grow for some 10 years. There's almost no change of population.
Yeah, in a newspaper article, the Rip Van Winkle-esque village of St. Charles or whatever they called it.
And then everything changes again, and almost at the same time, we get a lot of industry in town, like the Moline Malleable stuff going on.
Oh, Moline was the number one bringer of basically diversity into our spot here.
Yeah. And the jobs are so full and so different in skill levels and things like that everybody can find a job. And there's a pretty good turnover, I got a feeling.
Yeah.
And a lot of these jobs, especially people who have been farming their whole lives that, end up thinking, well, I'm going to go work in a factory. It's not the same thing at all to be under the guise of a supervisor and being expected to do X amount of things in a certain amount of time. But what kind of happens then is that this all kind of stagnates again to where we get into, say, the 60s and the 70s, 1960s, 1970s, where this town is, again, it's not a huge growth area. And when it does happen again, all of this growth happens in almost what you would consider like suburban St. Charles, right? It's not the downtown area. So now you're as likely to live in St. Charles and be maybe closer to South Elgin than you are to downtown St. Charles. So it's a lot harder to see that happen. You see it in the census numbers, but you don't necessarily see it in the businesses that open up in town or the things that are going on downtown. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about is that we really want to dig more because there's a lot of things that are important, especially back in the 50s when things were happening like block breaking when realtors were doing things and other stuff like that was going on. A lot of things about this after the Vietnam War and opportunities and stuff like that. Anybody that has any of that kind of information or background or experience in it, we'd love to hear from you here at the museum. We'd love to do some oral histories with you, if nothing else. But if there's information you have from your family and things like that, please share it with us because we are really struggling. Because in a lot of ways, even our best source for the old news is newspapers, but they're not an encyclopedia. They're absolutely written through the eyeballs. So you don't get it. So I would much rather find out somebody's got a scrapbook or somebody that went to school with, some people of color that could bring in, information about what their experience was here in St. Charles. I think that'd be great for us.
Absolutely. It's something we should be striving stronger to do. So I'm fully on board there.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a lot of fun today talking to Dilla. I think we did more talking than he did. But,
I know. I feel bad.
We wanted to get the Maxon story out to him and kind of intrigue him, so I hope we did that and look forward to maybe talking to him in the future some more about some of the combination things that
Yeah.
Chicago and us share, and see how we can help each other out with history. So with that, you got anything else, Eric?
By the time this goes out, the Duquesne exhibit will still be open, but it is closing shortly. The last time it will be open will be the second to last week of May there, and we'll be taking it down the last week of May. And we will be replacing it with our Music in St. Charles exhibit, which still remains titleless. But it'll be a great time. We'll be exploring the venues and the people, famous to local to big, small, everyone in between. We want to kind of get the opportunity to showcase. So we're going to be doing that for basically June to December.
Great. Well, we had Dennis O'Brien in here a couple of days ago.
Yes.
He did a great job. He
Fantastic.
did a live stream. If you, it's on YouTube. Just search for Dennis O'Brien. It's Brien music, and find his YouTube channel and subscribe to that, and you'll see the time he did here. Everybody loved it.
Absolute top-notch performance.
It was a lot of fun. He likes the way the room sounds too. So
Yeah.
maybe we could put some other big bands in here. I don't know. Are the Who still around? I know they play.
Who?
Yeah, that band. Yeah. So other than that, we have May 1st, which we'll have this out by then. May 1st is our History Rocks, which is our fundraising event. Mr. Ron Onesti has graciously allowed us to use Rock and Ravioli for that again. It's $60 in the door, $50 for members. It goes from 6 to 9 p.m. We're going to have a 50-50 raffle. We're going to be giving away half the cash that we take in the raffle, but also other prizes like tickets to our holiday gala in December, and maybe some other things that we haven't quite figured out yet. We're going to have live entertainment from the Ransom Creek Bluegrass Band. And I say Italian Feast with Ron Onesti's Meatballs.
Did you say his famous Italian meatballs, Steve?
Famous Italian Meatballs, yeah, will be part of the evening. So Cash Bar, come on out if you get a chance and visit with us. That's May 1st. Other than that, we've got a few other things going on right now. Holiday Gala is starting to get nailed down. It's going to be December 9th at the Hotel Baker. Stay tuned for more information on that. Please, if you haven't done it already, check out our membership link on our website and join the museum as a member so that you can hear about all the good things that we're working on. So saying that, I'm out of breath completely, and I think we'll sign off and say we'll see you guys soon in another podcast. Thanks a lot.
Have a great one.
Thank you for listening to the St. Charles History Chronicle podcast. This content is copyright 2024, St. Charles History Museum, all rights reserved. Thank you to Shermann Dilla Thomas, Chicago urban historian, for joining us today. You can find Dilla on TikTok and other social media spots, as well as his tour company's website, chicagomahogany.com. Additional information on this episode and other podcast episodes is available at stcmuseum.org/podcast.
This how the African can fight as we go marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. As we go marching on. We are done with hoeing cotton. We are done with hoeing corn. We are colored Yankee soldiers now, as sure as you are born. When the masters hear us yelling, they will think it's Gabriel's horn. As we go marching on. Father Abraham has spoken and the message has been sent. The prison doors he opened and out the prisoners went. He joined the sable army of the African descent. As